The night of May 1st, 2010, was thick with a heavy, salt-chilled fog that clung to the edges of Long Island's South Shore. In the exclusive, quiet enclave of Oak Beach, the silence was shattered by a sound that would haunt the community for decades: the frantic, desperate voice of 24-year-old Shannan Gilbert on a recorded 911 call that lasted nearly 23 minutes. Shannan's terror was palpable, a raw and jagged thing that cut through the mundane crackle of the dispatch line. She screamed that people were trying to kill her, her voice echoing with the primal fear of someone who had seen the face of death in the shadows. She vanished into the marshy darkness that night, leaving behind only a trail of unanswered questions and a growing sense of unease that something deeply wrong was festering beneath the surface of the coastal paradise. For months, the search for Shannan yielded nothing but frustration. It wasn't until December of that same year that the investigation took a turn toward the macabre. Officer John Malia and his K-9 partner, a diligent German shepherd named Blue, were conducting a training exercise along the desolate stretch of Ocean Parkway. Blue caught a scent, leading Malia away from the asphalt and into the thick, tangled scrub brush near Gilgo Beach. What they found was not Shannan Gilbert. Instead, they unearthed a skeletal hand reaching out from a shallow grave, the remains carefully wrapped in heavy camouflaged burlap. Within days, the search intensified, and the horror multiplied. 3 more bodies were discovered in similar conditions, spaced out with chilling precision along a narrow strip of land. These women would become known to the world as the Gilgo Four: Melissa Barthelemy, Amber Lynn Costello, Megan Waterman, and Maureen Brainard-Barnes were more than just headlines or police reports. They were daughters, sisters, and mothers who had been discarded like refuse in the brush. For too long, the media and the public had simplified their lives by labeling them merely as sex workers, but their families fought to remind the world of their humanity. They were young women caught in difficult circumstances, preyed upon by a monster who recognized their vulnerability and used it to erase them from existence. The setting for these crimes was a predator's playground. An Ocean Parkway is a lonely ribbon of highway flanked by the Atlantic Ocean and the Great South Bay, a landscape of windswept dunes and dense, unforgiving vegetation. In the off-season, it is a place of absolute solitude, where the roar of the waves masks the sounds of the night. The killer knew this terrain intimately, choosing a disposal site that was both hidden and yet hideously public, right under the noses of the thousands of commuters who passed by every day. The cruelty of the killer extended far beyond the acts of murder themselves. In the weeks following Melissa Barthelemy's disappearance, her teenage sister began receiving a series of chilling phone calls. The voice on the other end was calm, mocking, and deeply sadistic, using Melissa's own cell phone, whereas the killer detailed the graphic nature of his crimes and taunted the grieving girl, relishing in the psychological torment he was inflicting from the safety of a crowded Manhattan street. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. For a decade, the investigation into these murders seemed to vanish into the same fog that swallowed Shannan Gilbert. The Suffolk County Police Department was plagued by internal rot, spearheaded by the corruption of Chief James Burke. His refusal to cooperate with federal investigators and his own personal scandals created a wall of silence that allowed the trail to grow cold. The community lived in a state of suspended animation, fearing a phantom who seemed to have the power to simply disappear. However, in 2022, a new task force was formed with fresh eyes and modern technology. They returned to the very beginning, digging through boxes of old files until they found a single overlooked detail. A witness statement from 2010 mentioning a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche. This one forgotten clue was about to tear the mask off the monster. That Chevrolet Avalanche was the thread that finally began to unravel a decade of deception. It led the investigators straight to a man who lived in plain sight, a figure of suburban banality named Rex Heuermann. To his neighbors in Massapequa Park, he was a tall, imposing man who lived in a house that looked like it was being swallowed by time itself. The building, with its peeling paint and overgrown yard, stood in stark contrast to the manicured lawns surrounding it. He was a professional, and a successful Manhattan architect who commuted every day, carrying a briefcase and wearing the mask of a respectable family man. The task force didn't just rely on the vehicle. They mapped the digital echoes Heuermann left behind. They discovered a web of burner phones used to contact the victims, devices activated and deactivated with calculated precision. By cross-referencing cell tower pings, investigators found a terrifying pattern. These ghost phones were often used in two specific clusters, one near his architecture firm in Midtown Manhattan and another near his home in Massapequa Park. The killer wasn't a phantom roaming the wilderness. He was a commuter, operating within the rhythm of New York life, blending into the sea of people who passed through Penn Station every morning, each behind the doors of his home and the privacy of his office. Heuermann lived a dark, parallel existence. His digital footprint revealed a man obsessed with the investigation he had eluded for so long. He spent hours searching for updates on the Gilgo Beach cases, tracking the progress of police, and reading about the victims he had discarded. This obsession was fueled by a deeper, more violent depravity. His search history was a descent into the unthinkable, filled with violent pornography and graphic imagery that echoed the brutality of the crimes. He was relishing his handiwork, watching from the sidelines as the world wondered who the monster was. The breakthrough came not from a computer screen, but from a piece of garbage. Investigators shadowed Heuermann through the busy streets of Manhattan, watching him go about his daily routine. Second, in early 2023, they observed him discarding a pizza box into a trash can near his office. This was the moment they had been waiting for. Forensic teams recovered a leftover crust, and the DNA extracted from it was compared to a male hair found on the burlap used to wrap Megan Waterman. It was a match. The statistical probability was undeniable. The ghost finally had a face, and that face belonged to the man in the rumpled suit. As the task force dug deeper, they discovered a chilling logistical pattern. Every single time one of the women went missing, Heuermann's wife and children were out of town. He waited for the house to be empty, transforming his family home into a killing floor. This freedom allowed him to operate without the fear of discovery, giving him the space and time to commit his atrocities before returning to his role as a husband and father. Forensic genealogy was the final blow, confirming the DNA profile was unique to him and narrowing the suspect pool until he was the only possible candidate left. The final weeks were a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. Plainclothes officers watched his every move, lingering near Massapequa Park and following him into the subway. They waited for the perfect moment to strike, ensuring he wouldn't have the chance to destroy evidence. Finally, on a humid July night in 2023, the trap snapped shut. Rex Heuermann was tackled by undercover officers on a crowded sidewalk in Midtown Manhattan. He looked confused as the handcuffs clicked into place, but the true horror was yet to be revealed. As police searched his home, they descended into the basement. There, behind a heavy door, they found a soundproofed room, a chamber designed for silence, and a massive, illegal arsenal of weapons. The architect had built himself a dungeon, a place where his secret life and suburban reality collided. The silence of Massapequa Park was shattered by the hum of forensic generators. For 12 grueling days, the property at First Avenue was transformed from an eyesore into a grim archaeological site. Investigators in white Tyvek suits moved with clinical precision, stripping the walls and searching for the trophies a serial killer often keeps as mementos. In the backyard, a backhoe excavated the earth, uncovering secrets that had remained hidden for years. The search wasn't just about finding physical evidence, it was about deconstructing the manifestation of Rex Heuermann's double life. Inside that cramped house, the air was thick with the scent of decay, a testament to a man who had built a fortress of filth to hide his murderous planning. When Heuermann finally appeared in the courtroom, the world saw a man stripped of his architectural prestige. The cold metal of the handcuffs had finally replaced his architectural tools. He stood tall and imposing, yet his face remained a mask of stony indifference. Across the room sat the families of the victims, sisters, mothers, and children who had spent over a decade haunted by the unknown. They were finally facing the beast, seeing the face of their tormentor for the first time. The Long Island serial killer was no longer a shadowy myth. He was a man with a cold, analytical gaze. In that sterile room, the evil became tangible, personified by someone who looked like he could be anyone's neighbor. As the investigation broadened, the scope of Heuermann's alleged crimes grew darker. The task force began to connect the dots between the architect and other cold cases. New charges emerged, linking him to the brutal murders of Jessica Taylor and Sandra Costilla. The realization that the Long Island serial killer may be responsible for many more deaths than originally thought settled heavily over the community. Heuermann wasn't just a killer. He was a persistent predator who had honed his craft over decades. He had navigated the changing landscape of law enforcement and technology, staying one step ahead until his own hubris and a discarded pizza crust finally brought him down. The most damning piece of evidence was perhaps the most clinical. On one of Heuermann's encrypted devices, prosecutors discovered a digital planning document. This was a literal how-to guide for murder. It detailed everything from the types of supplies needed to the methods of body disposal that would best evade detection, outlining how to maximize pain and ensure the total disappearance of a human being. It laid bare the calculated nature of his crimes. These were not impulsive acts, but the result of meticulous preparation. Reading the excerpts was like staring into the abyss of a mind that viewed human life as nothing more than a logistics problem to be solved. The legacy of the Gilgo Beach investigation has fundamentally changed the landscape of criminal justice. For years, the victims were marginalized, often referred to by their profession. This case forced a reckoning with that stigma. The narrative shifted from missing sex workers to missing daughters, sisters, and mothers. It highlighted the systemic failures that occur when the vulnerable are ignored, and showed how advanced technology could bridge the gap between a cold case and a conviction. The 2022 task force didn't just find a killer. They restored the dignity of those he tried to erase. In the end, the story of Rex Heuermann is a haunting and permanent reminder that the most dangerous monsters do not hide in the woods. They commute on the train, they design buildings, and they live in the house next door. He wore the mask of an ordinary man so well that he almost became invisible. While the trial looms and the legal battle is far from over, the families finally have something they were denied for 13 years. A name. The families once lost in grief, it's now stand together. The shadow over Ocean Parkway has begun to lift, replaced by the somber, steady march of justice. The mystery is gone, leaving only the truth in its wake.